Final Fantasy VII Remake, while being a tremendously polished game that boasts beautiful graphics and fun gameplay. It just wasn't my cup of tea. So what is then? You want to know what my favorite Final Fantasy game is? From the games that I've played in this franchise alone, I can safely conclude that the one title that screams excellence and incredible game design would have to be Final Fantasy IX. It may not be as flashy or as voice acted as the newer Final Fantasy titles, but this game will forever hold a spot in my heart. Whether that's due to my genuine love for the game or perhaps an air of nostalgia, I do like this game a lot. I have some bias though, I'm not gonna lie. This was my first Final Fantasy game, and I don't regret playing it back when I was little. This was also my first PlayStation 1 title. I understand that some people just can't stand the idea of not liking the more popular choices, and that by comparison Final Fantasy IX honestly just looks like trash. But I firmly believe there's a reason Square had to revive this gem as an updated port, including the Steam Digital release, which is what I've been playing recently. The legend himself, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the entire Final Fantasy series, has stated that Final Fantasy IX is his favorite too. I'm not making this video to try and convince people that this game is definitively better than the others. Just out of my own experience with this gaming franchise, Final Fantasy IX is my personal favorite. I don't mean to discredit the newer Final Fantasy games, or even the most popular Final Fantasy, FF7, as Square is highly capable of making successful JRPGs, and honestly a subjective video like this is only aimed to give appreciation for a game that I spent hours playing and thoroughly enjoyed, both in my youth and even to this very day. So it's just my opinion, alright, I hope you guys don't get offended, and I'm not here to make fun of or trash other Final Fantasy games that you may like. Although I may dish my opinions out here and there about some things I hate about Final Fantasy games. Not that I ultimately hate any Final Fantasy games, but there are certainly qualities of this franchise that I heavily despise, which 9 alternatively does better. Final Fantasy IX stands out to me as something more wholesome and a complete package, and as something that newer and even older Final Fantasy games never really had in my eyes, or at least to the same extent that Final Fantasy IX beautifully illustrates. A component that exists in the very title of every single game in this entire franchise. When I think of fantasy, I usually think of, well, what the word is defined as, but the term fantasy usually brings my mind to a world that's unlike our own, something that's akin to what you may find in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, worlds that don't make much sense when applied with any realism. But once you take that out and explore outside that constant, you start to find appreciation for how amazing the world building is. Modern Final Fantasy titles tend to emphasize on more realistic proportions and pushing the graphical limitation of the respective consoles that they were released on, with some slight anime mannerisms and tropes that still creep up. I'm not saying that these games aren't fantasy, but it's not as fantastical to me. No, it's not necessarily the lack of any medieval backdrop that I'm talking about here. It's the overall tone. The first 6 Final Fantasy games showcase the usual JRPG style that got Square so successful in the first place, and it's a shame that they ditched it for more popular dark and dystopic story structures that started in Final Fantasy VII. Not to say that it's bad. I like the more futuristic style. Blade Runner is one of my favorite films of all time, but this feel to me just isn't my favorite for Final Fantasy. 9 is what I feel does a good recap of what made those first 6 games fantastical and JRPG-esque. It goes back to the company's roots as we get to see colorful and vibrant environments. But not only does this game incorporate more features that made the first 6 games amazing, it improves upon it, specifically on the main party members. The characters in this game are what make the adventures so bearable and worth spending hours of time. The cinematography and way dialogue is written is so incredible, not even for its time, but just in general. Square, in my opinion though, as of lately, has had trouble creating party members as deep and wholesome as 9 did. Maybe it's just me, but in more recent Final Fantasy games, I just fail to connect with the main cast of characters. They don't feel as real or as developed as the cast of Final Fantasy IX. Each character in this game has their own story arc, which they successfully go through and change as a result. But see, the plot isn't fit to circulate around their problem. The ongoing conflict between the Queen of Alexandria and her lust for power, as well as Kuja's influence and tyranny, is something that sets the story, but doesn't define who the characters are, and the plot isn't magically set to purposely expose these characters. Nothing in the story feels like it was forced, The characters have their own reasons for being there, and naturally go through their own character arcs without anything feeling too artificial. I never thought that Vivi's existential spiral or Zidane's depression was purposely put into this game. Rather, the villains that help make the protagonists' lives worse expose these moral dilemmas naturally, making the cast themselves feel very memorable over time. I mean, technically everything in this game is done for a reason. The writers wrote this stuff in, obviously. The developers programmed it to be this way, and wanted to pave the story to talk about these things. But it never felt artificial, and I was always suspended in how well the story was told and what the characters actually faced. Vivi is a notable example here. His character arc was so deep and fulfilling. I would argue he's probably one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters ever conceived in this entire franchise. His Black Mage looks are definitely inspired by the first Final Fantasy game, back when the Black Mage character was unveiled. But here in Final Fantasy IX, this version of the Black Mage actually gets a pretty interesting backstory that's kinda sad. In this universe, Black Mages are created by the villain, Kuja, to be monsters that serve the Kingdom of Alexandria. Vivi happened to be a prototype of these creatures and managed to accidentally escape by falling out of a cargo ship. He grew up having a conscience of his own and was adopted by Quan. Cool design, but damn, this guy looks kinda funny. Anyways, Quan passed down his own ideals to Vivi while he raised him, teaching him all he knew about the world before he passed away. After Vivi does end up joining the main cast and gets involved in the plot, he starts to uncover that people of his race are actually manufactured as mindless drones meant to serve the antagonists. As you go throughout the game, he's forced to fight his way through these Black Mages, and sadly all of them lack a conscience, something that he was lucky enough to attain. Black Mages are seen as agents of chaos, demons, and pure evil, being hated by a majority of the supporting characters. Vivi's own anxiety about his race becomes further emphasized, and he starts to wonder about his own identity and if he's really destined to become a mindless spawn for the Queen as well. Once Vivi and his friends manage to find a village with Black Mages, he sees that there are more Black Mages out there who have also been awakened, so to speak, in the sense that they have feelings and thoughts just like he does. They defected off of being bad guys for a better life, but in reality, it's a life filled with illusion. The wise Black Mage who acts like a mayor in the village tells Vivi how he built a cemetery for the Black Mages who have died, after living their short finite lifespans of a single year, something the other Black Mages don't even know about. The very nature of death is what bothers Vivi, as he starts to wonder if he's gonna die too, just like his adopted father, and the other Black Mages they faced, and the ones here in the cemetery. Since he's a Black Mage, he figures he'll probably die shortly as well, and he's scared. His friends do try to comfort him and get his mind off of death, but Vivi does linger on this topic for quite a while. He starts to wonder what his purpose in life truly is, and if he is perhaps just another illusion. A famous quote this character says in the story is, "How do you prove that you exist? Maybe we don't exist." He eventually comes to realize that he won't live forever, and his time will come where he'll have to pass away. The ending of the game is told directly from his point of view, where he thanks everyone before it's implied that his 1-year lifespan passes by. And his son is the one shown here in the ending, with him dead, but nonetheless thankful for all the adventures he's had with his best friends, including and especially the main protagonist, Zidane, a friend he never got to say goodbye to. For a character that hardly has any facial features whatsoever, I feel more for him than I've ever felt for any of the protagonists in the boy band Final Fantasy XV had. Yeah, Prompto was just a light-hearted cloud that never shut up. I never found anything noteworthy to feel for his character. Adding an extra DLC story chapter behind a paywall that should have been clearly included with the original release of the game only adds to the fire. Although his backstory is also somewhat similar to Cloud's, in the sense that it's pretty sad. But it's silly that in the main game I can't feel anything for him, and I dislike him as a party member. The other guys in Final Fantasy XV were not as memorable for me. I just couldn't bond with them. Vivi for me outshines all of them put together, including Noctis. I'll never understand how Square managed to give life into a creature with a pointy head and yellow eyes. When I was little, I actually thought Vivi was a Heartless from Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, I played Kingdom Hearts before any Final Fantasy game, so I guess I probably shouldn't judge a character strictly off of their looks, and I'm thankful that I disregarded my prejudice entirely, because by the end of this game I was pleased to have had this character in my party, and almost teared up when he passed on. Even the comic relief character, Steiner, or as I named him, Brock. Yeah, I'm not sure why I named him that.
Hey, I know! I'll use my trusty frying pan as a drying pan!
He has his own character arc that gets fully resolved by the end time of this game. He's not as focused as the main characters Zidane and Garnet, but he too struggles with his own issues of loyalty and servitude. Despite working for the Kingdom of Alexandria, after seeing the black mages being pumped out of factories and Princess Garnet being constantly subjected to danger due to the Queen's actions, he starts to wonder if he's being loyal to the wrong people. He acts as a bodyguard for Garnet, and tries to stop her constantly from coming into danger. But even when he doesn't do so, the group still faces death and violence, all because the Queen commanded monsters to go after them. Feeling disregarded, despite his rank as captain of the Knights of Pluto, as silly as it sounds, it's actually quite a prestigious feat. He starts to slowly let Garnet be her own independent woman, and let go of his egotism. What egotism exactly? Well, he treats the main protagonist, Zidane, like garbage. He looks down on him for stealing Garnet, but also being a poor criminal. They eventually reconcile their issues and actually become pretty good friends, once Steiner starts to see how Zidane respects Garnet, that Garnet willingly wanted to be kidnapped since she was so tired of living in the kingdom. By the end of the game, he gains respect, not only for Zidane and his motley crew of friends, but for himself too. The self-respect he gains allows him to make more decisions not dependent on others, and he stops seeing people in absolutes, and allows for moral grayness to be a given with no matter who he's talking to. The humbleness he succumbs to is a blessing for both his friends and himself as well. Putting aside his arrogance even allows him to get it on with his rival knight, Beatrix, who's kind of a jerk in the beginning of the game, but a few discs later, and even her antagonism fades as well as she starts to realize how much of a facade the Kingdom of Alexandria really was. And it's through this she manages to put aside her own hatred for Steiner. Yeah, and then just to please all the anime shippers playing this game, let's just say things get pretty steamy in the kingdom. I could focus on other characters too, the two main protagonists themselves, Zidane and Garnet, but I feel like those two are centered on the most in game. Still, every party member has some kind of backstory that never retracts from the game, and is handled very well to purposely fit and be cohesive enough to justify its inclusion in the first place. Final Fantasy VI was also a game that had a strong cast of characters. I'm not saying that the way I view Final Fantasy IX isn't biased. Yeah, the way I feel about 9 is solely based on it being the epicenter of my fascination for the Final Fantasy franchise. I mean, it was my first Final Fantasy game after all. So I feel that Final Fantasy IX did a good job of integrating characters fluently enough to make me care about them. But going back to Final Fantasy VI, I'm not saying that this game doesn't have a good cast of characters. I acknowledge why this game is so popular within the Final Fantasy fan base. I just never connected well enough with the party members. Not as well as Final Fantasy IX. Perhaps it was probably because this game had the largest amount of party members for any Final Fantasy game, totaling to 14 playable characters. I don't know. I also wasn't entertained the most by the game's story, although I really do like the world building and more steampunk vibes this game went for. I just felt overwhelmed with the amount of characters you meet in the story. It went over my head. Maybe that's just me being too narrow-minded or not at that level of gaming where I can fully appreciate what 6 accomplished. Ah well, my bad Final Fantasy VI fans, I guess I got bad taste. The way a particular character speaks, their vocabulary, the overall emotion you feel from the text is real to me in Final Fantasy IX. The story, despite it being super long, spanning over 4 discs of content, never has a scene that showcases tedious conversation that feels more like filler. Even if this game doesn't have any fancy voice acting or high quality animations that you'd come to expect from newer Final Fantasy games, I still feel an emotional bond to the way these characters talk. I know this is how Zidane should speak. His dialogue and mannerisms are always consistent throughout the adventure. The same can be said for how polite and proper Garnet feels. At no point would I tell myself, that's not how a character should act. For a game with a lot of dialogue, I just can't get bored. There's something always engaging about the lines in this game. The dialogue is well written, and fun to watch as these characters progress and grow throughout the story. It was also nice how the developers decided to fill in gaps of background and supporting characters interacting with each other through the usage of a new cutscene feature which was known as active time events. Basically, you could decide to view these small cutscenes that showed what was going on between different characters that weren't in the main party, or just what was going on between NPCs in the background, breathing more life into the game. These active time events were also pivotal in figuring out puzzles, and were basically a way for the game to give out hints. There are so many happy and wondrous moments in this game, but also extremely heartbreaking and emotional scenes that you couldn't believe would fit in a game with such cute graphics. So many massacres, so much bloodshed. One particular disturbing plot twist that really got to me was when Zidane was told his origin story, and how he was meant to be this angel of death, created for the sole purpose of eradicating the world of Gaia, a place he grew up and created connections to so many people. The fact that his entire being was designed for the sole purpose of destruction really bothers him. It torments him so much he actually spirals into depression, believing that everything he knew was a lie. When his friends try to help him remember who he was, he ignores them, out of fear that he may hurt them too, until they all eventually make him realize that he, much like anyone else in the story, has the choice to determine his own path and destiny, and thus craves the life he built for himself in Gaia, and chooses to instead protect everyone he cares about. Vivi trying to help him cope with this just makes it all the more precious, especially since he himself had a similar kind of confusion about his own identity. So the two characters essentially piggyback on helping each other realize that their lives cannot be predetermined and that they are the ones responsible for what lives they may lead. And the epiphany both of these characters have only deepened their friendship. And, in a similar sense, deepens Garnet's affection towards Zidane as well, as she was the one at the end of the day who manages to help him realize just how valuable his life is, and that he should cherish the bonds and connections he's made thus far. Man, it's so beautiful, Shrek. The combat in this game follows the usual active time battle system that's been used in so many Final Fantasy games. It's nice to see uniqueness in each party member, a trait that helps illustrate the individuality of these characters. I mean, it's no secret that JRPGs like to give you a group of characters to play around with so you can use their many different abilities to help in specific circumstances that would require them to do so. For example, in this game, you can use Zidane's unique ability to steal items from enemies. This becomes incredibly important for attaining inventory for items that can only appear by using Zidane's steal ability. But Zidane alone is not a good fighter. He lacks proper mage abilities, ones that Vivi, Aiko, and Garnet can help out with. Freya, in my eyes, is a great physical hitter, and her Dragon Killer ability really did help me on my first playthrough. Honestly, you can use any character you want throughout the game and still beat it. It just depends on what kind of challenge you want and what ways you want to enjoy experiencing this game. Also, in case you might get confused here, some of the gameplay I'm showing has times where the menu box is both blue and gray colored. That's because dumb me didn't realize you could actually change the color of the text boxes in this game on the PC version. Oh yeah, I definitely prefer the classic blue, but I hate the boring gray. Anyways, for the party members, you can actually equip different kinds of headgear, armlets, gauntlets. Basically, you have a lot of choice and options as to how you want to better your character's stats. You can even change their weapons, which is probably something you should do if you want to advance in this game. Trust me, you'll be doing a lot of grinding. Or, if you're playing the port, you can actually cheat with a lot of game boosters. 999 damage, invincible health, yep. This is the option for players who don't want to have to grind and just want to experience the story more. Players like me. Look, to be fair, I didn't use it all the time and I love playing this game, but there are certain points where I just get lazy. I could spend the next couple hours grinding and getting better equipment and weapons, and then going ahead of the story, or I could just assign a game booster and yeah, that should do it. It is definitely cheating, I understand, and only something I would use as a last resort if I really wanted to advance in the story. But when I first played this on PS1, I never had that chance and just kept on pushing to beat the game. Man, I wonder how I even got through some of this stuff. All the grinding and figuring out what to do without any kind of guide had to weigh me down at some point. I just can't remember what it was like, playing the game without actually using the internet or any guides. Back then when I was young, I didn't even know how to use the internet. I can't say the same for any Zelda games though. Man, in those games they really don't tell you what to do sometimes. But on that note, this game isn't necessarily hard, but it is a long game. 4 discs of content, and especially the second and third discs. Whew, man, they're pretty long. If you've got the patience and get suspended enough into the game like I was, you won't be bothered by how often random encounters happen. Although, again, if you want, you can turn on a game booster that calms this feature down. Cheating, hacking, call it whatever you want. I just hate having to face off against so many enemies. This game is atrocious for having so many random encounters. I only need them when I feel like I'll benefit from them. There are a lot of side quests in this game. As cool as they were, one of them really pissed me off, even as a kid. I'm not talking about the jump rope challenge. The chocobo ones were actually pretty fun. I liked going through the world map and finding more armor and equipment. The card game, however, Tetramaster I think it's called. Oh man, that was messed up. I'm sorry, I didn't like it. I didn't like how the game forces you to complete it just to advance in the story. I guess it's their way of punishing you, or me in this case, for never bothering to understand it. Thankfully, they do drop hints on how to play the card game, but I was an idiot and messed up so many times when I had to play that stupid card tournament back in Disc 3. Oh man, come on! Oh, come on, I was so close! You gotta be kidding me! It's not the worst card game I've ever seen, and I'm sure there are enthusiasts out there who love the side quest. It's not even that the game doesn't explain to you on what to do and how to play the card game. It does. I just didn't care. I really didn't. And the plot didn't seem to care either. Square decided to put this into their game because... I don't know. There was absolutely no plot relevancy, besides meeting up with Regent Sid, but the writers could have thought of something better than this. I mean, don't get me wrong, card games are cool in general, okay? But damn it, I just wanted to play the game and have the cool RPG battles and see the usual anime love triangle, you know? The graphics in this game are really nice, even for its time. Once they ported this game for current consoles, for some reason, Square refused to make the backgrounds and environments as stunning as the new up-res in-game models. It looks very... awkward. However, if you've got the Steam version like I do, you can actually get a fan-made mod, known as the Meguri mod. It's essentially a way for making all these backgrounds a lot more cleaner and higher resolution, by using artificial intelligence, and more specifically, deep learning. You wouldn't think at first an older game like this could benefit from that, but see the results for yourself. Yeah, this is definitely an improvement. I'm surprised it took fans to fix this, and not something the actual company cared enough to do. Oh well, regardless, I'm thankful for what these guys have done. You get more of that hand-drawn aesthetic that fits in really well with the game's colorful cast of characters. And if it isn't clear by now, this is not the same art style as Final Fantasy VII, 8, or any of the newer Final Fantasy titles. Yoshitaka Amano, a character designer who's worked on the beginning Final Fantasy games, combined with Hideo Minaba's overall art direction, allowed for the more or less realistic and more chippier designs. They managed to avoid any super deformed uncanniness that I saw back in Final Fantasy VII. But to be fair, Square was getting used to 3D modeling at the time, as it was a rough learning curve for all game developers back in the 90s. Still, I like Final Fantasy IX's more cartoony art style, and coupled with the medieval backdrops and less realism in overall environments, things meshed really well for me. For many though, I could see how the character proportions and facial looks can be a little uncanny and downright dreadful to look at. Again though, this is just my opinion, and I honestly think the overall character designs and art style is one of my favorites of any Final Fantasy title. But sadly, I know they'll never come back to this style for any mainline Final Fantasy game. If you want to check out the Meguri mod, I'll post a link in the description for their website. They even made a nice flipbook that displays all the gorgeous backgrounds they've managed to improve upon, allowing for this game to truly shine in all the glory it deserves.
Hey, I'm here with Hironobu Sakaguchi-san, the creator of Final Fantasy, and he has something very important to say.
I like 9, of course.
Final Fantasy IX is the best. Well, you heard it here from the man himself, so here you go. And so the debate is finally over. You heard it from the man himself. Done.
He's so cool. Wait a minute, that's actually technically binary for 17. So, his favorite must be Final Fantasy 17. I know this because, Sakurai taught me that. No, but really, Sakaguchi has gone on record saying in an interview that Final Fantasy IX was, based on a reflection of all the previous works in the series, the coming installment is my favorite. It's closest to my ideal view of what Final Fantasy should be. I agree with that sentiment, even though he technically had this mindset while working as a producer for the game back when it was close to completion, and maybe he said this in order to build hype for the game. It's hard to say whether or not he's changed his mind in the last 2 decades, but since then he hasn't retracted that quote, and if what he said in that recent video is anything to go off of, I can safely conclude that Final Fantasy IX is probably still his favorite, and it's mine as well. Final Fantasy IX is a beautiful game. If you're a fan of older Final Fantasy games, then you'll feel right at home with many of the storytelling and gameplay pacing that I've come to respect for the series. I definitely could see how this game is a homage to the first 6 Final Fantasy games, and at the same time, also an appropriate departure, before Square decided to focus on making Final Fantasy titles more realistic and less colorful. The game starts out in a warm-hearted tone, but later digresses to a more serious and grim lens. Earlier Final Fantasy games had done this well, but I honestly think 9 was more refined in achieving those hard-hitting emotional beats. For a game so brightly stylized and cartoony, you wouldn't think it could venture into philosophical concepts that revolve around existentiality and fear of death. Characters naturally deal with loss in this story, and the road to overcoming such tribulations are what make me appreciate this game so much. The developers really cared for the story and wanted to push hard thematic messages. No matter what game I'm playing, I definitely have to be engrossed with the gameplay mechanics. Graphics aren't a big concern for me. As long as they're tolerable enough to not bother me while playing, I have no problem. But ultimately, it's the story that stands out to me above all else, and this game knocked it out of the park. When I play Final Fantasy IX, I'm looking at a painting of a group of people, standing together and trying to defeat their own negativity and depression. They've all got different issues, some arguably more troubling than others. Despite how bright and colorful everything is, there are many hidden and depressing somber themes that could easily fit in a Metal Gear Solid game. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but maybe not. I mean, this is some pretty dark ass stuff we're talking about. Is this the darkest game I've ever played? No. It's not even the darkest Final Fantasy game there is. It's filled with a lot of funny moments, like with the whole love letter mishap. That was pretty funny. Or just any of Queena's lines. But this game is definitely the deepest for me, and I just love the way these themes are handled so maturely. When I was young, I could connect to what this game was talking about. Even to this day, I still somewhat have a fear of death, although I'm definitely better off than how I used to be. I used to get panic attacks and existential anxiety, especially throughout middle school, wondering about death and how I really didn't want to die. Kind of a dark place for me. The main theme song that's played in many renditions over the entirety of the game, and what you're hearing right now in the background, is known as Melodies of Life. It has lyrics that really encapsulate just how sad but beautiful and powerful these characters are, and how they feel throughout their adventure. Nobuo Uematsu, the legendary composer that's worked on so many Final Fantasy songs, not to mention the Super Smash Bros. Franchise, has admitted that this game was his favorite work, his magnum opus. And I agree, this game has some beautiful music. You know what? I'm gonna bust out my violin. I'm gonna show you guys just how pretty this song sounds. Oh yeah, it's beautiful. Thanks for watching, and if you like my video, you could always subscribe, but you don't have to. Alright, have a great day, and enjoy my little recital I got for you guys.